Welcome to Rescue Paws Stories, your go-to place for heartwarming and emotional humans and animals stories. In a sleepy coastal village where fishermen cast their nets each morning and the sea whispered its ancient lullabies, there was a legend of a ghost puppy, one that had been seen limping along the rocky shoreline, its fur matted, skin raw, and whimper barely audible beneath the crashing waves. Most dismissed it as a sad tale told to children to keep them from wandering the jagged rocks at low tide. But one rainy morning, as the tide began to pull back, a fisherman named Elias discovered that the legend was heartbreakingly real. Tangled in a mass of seaweed and driftwood near the barnacle-covered rocks lay a puppy so still, Elias thought it was dead. His body was battered, covered in thick, salt-soaked fur, riddled with deep cuts and painful sores. His belly was bloated, his limbs trembling from exhaustion. Most disturbingly, barnacles had begun to latch onto his skin, clinging like parasites, alongside actual ones that wriggled beneath his fur. Elias, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, felt something break inside him. He wrapped the tiny creature in his raincoat and sprinted to the village vet, his boots splashing through puddles, shouting for help like a man on fire. The puppy, now unconscious, was barely clinging to life. The vet, Dr. Mara Holden, gasped when she saw the extent of the injuries. "He's been in the water for days, maybe longer," she murmured, "and no one's been looking for him." It took hours, delicate surgeries to remove embedded barnacles, tweezers to extract dozens of parasites, IV drips, blood transfusions, and soft words spoken into the puppy's ears as he lay between life and death. They named him Tide, for the sea that had almost claimed him. News of the rescue spread across the town, and soon the puppy became a symbol. The local school children drew pictures of him and sent cards. Elderly townsfolk knitted small blankets. And Elias, who had once lived alone after losing his wife, came every day to sit beside Tidy's recovery bed, humming old lullabies he hadn't sung in years. But the shock came 3 weeks later, as Tide began to heal, fur regrowing, strength returning. Something remarkable was discovered. When Dr. Holden took a closer look at the puppy's body during a routine scan, she noticed a tiny embedded microchip that had been damaged but not erased. After hours of decoding it with a rescue database technician, they traced it to an address over 300 miles away. Tide wasn't just a stray. He was a registered emotional support animal belonging to a 6-year-old boy named Owen, who had gone mute after his father died. Tide had vanished during a beach trip 2 months prior, when a sudden storm swept him out to sea. The family believed he had drowned, and Owen hadn't spoken a word since. Elias and Dr. Holden contacted the boy's mother. At first, she didn't believe it. How could a dog survive that long? That hurt. But the moment they reunited Tide with Owen at the clinic, the truth burst forth. The battered puppy limped toward the silent boy and gently placed his paw on his chest. Owen gasped, then whispered, for the first time in 2 months, "Tide." Tears filled the room. Elias, the mother, the vet techs, even strangers who had gathered outside. The healing that Tide had gone through physically was mirrored in the emotional healing that began in Owen's heart that day. The bond between them hadn't broken. It had merely been tested by nature's fury and fate's challenge. But Tide's story didn't end there. Elias, now something of a local hero, launched the Tide Foundation, aimed at rescuing injured and forgotten animals along the coast. The first puppy to be cared for under its name? A small blind mutt found tangled in fishing wire, rescued by none other than Tide himself, who now instinctively led Elias along the beach each morning, sniffing for signs of life. People came from far away to meet the sea's miracle puppy, and in his eyes they saw not just the pain he had endured, but the incredible love and loyalty that had carried him through every crashing wave, every stormy night, and every lonely hour until he found his way home again. In the months that followed Tide's miraculous reunion with Owen, the little coastal town transformed. What had once been a quiet fishing village became a place of stories, healing, and second chances. But for Elias, now the heart of the Tide Foundation, every morning started the same way, with Tide padding alongside him on the wet sand, nose low, ears alert, tail gently wagging in rhythm with the waves. Tide had changed. The pain in his eyes had faded, replaced by a quiet wisdom, an unshakable calm that seemed to draw people to him. Children who struggled with trauma came to see him, and somehow, sitting next to him in the quiet, they began to speak. Veterans visited the sanctuary and found peace, placing a hand on his head. Even hardened fishermen, roughened by years at sea, would kneel by him and whisper about their losses, their regrets, things they couldn't tell anyone else. But no one expected what Tide would do next. One foggy morning, Tide halted during his walk. Elias, curious, followed his line of sight and saw nothing, but Tide wouldn't move. He stared out at a collapsed section of cliff where the tide met jagged stone. Elias followed his lead and carefully climbed down. That's when he heard it. A faint mewl. Not a dog. A kitten. Nestled beneath a tangle of thorny brush was a tiny calico kitten, eyes swollen, ribs visible, covered in fleas. Tide didn't bark or panic. He simply lay down on the rocks, close enough to comfort the kitten until Elias reached her. They brought her back, and the vet confirmed she wouldn't have survived another hour. Tide had sensed her, somehow, from a distance. That night, the kitten curled beside him and for the first time purred in her sleep. They named her Pebble. Word of the story spread. People began calling Tide the whisper of the shore, an animal who could hear suffering even when no one else could. More injured animals followed, a wounded falcon, a one-eyed sea otter, even a seal pup tangled in netting. Tide was always the first to find them, always the one to sit calmly nearby, as if telling them, "You're safe now. I've been where you are." But while animals healed, so did Owen. The little boy who once sat silent and broken now laughed as Tide chased seagulls across the sand. He told stories about their bond, drew pictures of the sea, and began speaking in school, first about Tide, then about his father, and slowly about his own grief. He became the voice Tide never had. And then came the unexpected visitor. One day, a man in a dark suit came to the sanctuary. He worked for a national animal rescue organization. He had heard of Tide's story and wanted to nominate him for the National Hero Dog Award. Elias chuckled. "Tide doesn't care about awards," he said. But Owen beamed. "But maybe the world needs to hear his story." At the ceremony in the big city, Tide walked across the stage, limping slightly, but with his head held high. The crowd stood as one. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when Owen, now 7, took the mic and said, "Tide saved me. Not just from the ocean, but from my sadness. He listens when no one else can." The boy and the dog embraced, and the world saw not just a hero, but a miracle. Back in the village, life remained simple. Tide, Elias, Owen, and the growing animal family lived in the seaside sanctuary, walking the beach at dawn, looking not for trouble, but for those the world had forgotten. And Tide, with his gentle soul and sea-washed scars, reminded everyone who came near him that even the most broken creatures can become the strongest healers. As the seasons changed, the sanctuary became more than just a place of rescue. it became a pilgrimage site. People journeyed from across the country, hoping to catch a glimpse of the remarkable dog who had endured so much and given even more. But for Elias, Owen, and the growing family of animals, the miracle wasn't in the attention. It was in the small, quiet transformations that happened each day. One autumn morning, as amber leaves scattered across the shore and sea mist rolled in with the tide, Tide stopped during his usual walk. He gazed out to sea, unmoving. Elias followed his line of sight. There, tangled in a mass of kelp, was something unusual, something glinting in the sun. It wasn't until they pulled it ashore that Elias realized it was an old, rusted cage, one used in illegal dogfighting rings. Inside, trembling but alive, was a black Labrador with deep scars across her face and ribs showing through her thin coat. She wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't move, wouldn't eat. But Tide knew what to do. For days he lay beside her, offering no pressure, only presence. When she cried in her sleep, he nudged her awake gently, lying still so she wouldn't feel alone. And on the 7th day, she placed her paw over his. They named her Hope. Hope's story brought even more awareness, and soon the authorities investigated and uncovered a brutal illegal operation miles away. 15 dogs were rescued, and each one brought to the sanctuary, where Tide and Hope helped them feel safe again. It was as if Tide had chosen a new mission, not just to be a survivor, but a guardian for those too broken to ask for help. Owen grew too. Now 8, he began writing short books, children's stories about animals who overcome impossible odds. He published one titled Tide's Light, and to everyone's surprise, it became a bestseller. The royalties helped expand the sanctuary. A new wing was built, complete with a veterinary clinic, a grief counseling center, and a reading room for kids like Owen, who had known sorrow far too early. But it wasn't just animals that found solace there. People, young and old, came seeking healing. Veterans suffering from PTSD, children with autism, elderly widows mourning lifelong partners. And always, it was Tide they sought. They said just sitting beside him was like hearing the ocean whisper, "You are not alone." Then, one stormy night, something strange happened. Tide, now graying, restless, and slower than before, barked loudly for the first time in years. Elias and Owen ran to him as he scratched at the door. He bolted outside toward the cliffs, lightning flashing above. There, on the edge of the sea, a teenage girl was clinging to the rocks, crying. She'd been planning to jump. It was Tide who reached her first. He sat, unmoving, eyes steady, soaked by rain. Something in his gaze froze her. She didn't jump. Instead, she knelt down and sobbed into his fur until help arrived. Her name was Lily, and weeks later, she returned to volunteer at the sanctuary. She never spoke of that night again, but wore a bracelet engraved with one word: Tide. Years passed. The sanctuary, now known as Tide's Refuge, became a global symbol of compassion and second chances. Journalists, filmmakers, and even school groups came to learn about the miracle that began with one wounded, barnacle-covered puppy on the edge of death. But time, as always, moves forward. Tide's face had grown white with age, his legs stiff, his hearing dulled. Yet every morning, he still rose to greet the sun with Elias, walking the shore slowly, watching the tide roll in and out like breath. Sometimes he paused to look at the sea, perhaps remembering the pain, or perhaps simply grateful. Owen, now a teenager, had dedicated himself to veterinary studies. He knew Tide wouldn't be with them forever, and he wanted to be ready. not to stop the inevitable, but to honor the gift tide had given them by continuing the work. Then came the day they all had quietly feared. It was a calm spring morning, the sea glassy and peaceful. Tide didn't get up. His breathing was soft, slow, peaceful. Elias knelt beside him, stroking the grey fur, whispering thank yous. Owen held his paw. Hope, the once broken Labrador, now strong and protective, lay beside him, and surrounded by every soul he had helped heal, human and animal. Tide closed his eyes and gently passed. There was no ceremony big enough to hold what they felt. Instead, they honored him in the simplest way. They lit a lantern and set it adrift on the water he once emerged from, once broken, now whole. But the story didn't end there. That night, something extraordinary happened. In the sky above the sanctuary, a strange phenomenon appeared, a shimmering band of light, like the northern lights, dancing across the horizon. It was caught on video and broadcast worldwide. Locals called it Tide's Farewell. Some said it was coincidence, but those who had known him, truly known him, believed otherwise. Inspired by his life, more sanctuaries began to emerge in his name. Tide's Refuge, New Hope in Oregon, Tide's Haven in Ireland, Tide's Light in Japan, all carried the same mission: rescue, heal, love. Hope became the matriarch of the sanctuary, guiding new arrivals with the same gentleness once given to her. Owen eventually took over the full operations, while Elias, his hair white now, took to writing. His memoir, The Dog Who Saved Us All, became a classic, and each spring, on the anniversary of the day they found him, people gather on the beach with lanterns, not to mourn, but to celebrate a life that rippled like waves across the world. They say if you stand by the shore at just the right moment, you can still hear the soft crunch of paws in the sand and feel a warm presence beside you. Tide never really left. He simply became part of the ocean, part of the healing wind, part of every broken heart that dared to believe in second chances again.